Good morning. So I brought something with me today. I'd like to show it to you. Some of you may recognize this immediately. To others of you, this may look like an ancient artifact. It's an atlas, and inside, it's full of maps. Real ones, printed on paper, no blue dot, no voice telling you to turn left. See, there was a time not too long ago when if you wanted to go somewhere, you had to learn how to read one of these. You had to orient yourself to pay attention and sometimes even stop and ask for help. If you're over a certain age, you probably are feeling a little nostalgic or maybe even thankful that technology has found a better way. But if you're under a certain age, you might be thinking, why would you ever choose to use one of those things when you can just use your phone? And that's fair, because a map like this one requires something that we're not always used to today: active participation. You don't just follow it passively, you engage it, you interpret it, and sometimes incorrectly, and that leads to getting lost. And then there comes a day where the map stops being useful. This one was printed in 2018, probably the last one they ever printed, if we're honest. It's not wrong anymore, but it could be incorrect because the world has changed. Now, my family, we've been generously invited to share with you guys today as missionaries launching to Scotland. My name's Alisha Garber, and along with my husband Josh and our son Asher, we've been asked by Communitas International to serve a church in Glasgow called Mosaic. Sadly, the reality of the faith landscape in Scotland is very different than what it once was. The church no longer sits at the center of life anymore. It's as if the map that they used to orient everything doesn't quite line up with the terrain anymore. So I'd like to play a video for you about sharing more of that. It looks like this.
One would be forgiven for thinking that the church is doing fine in Scotland. For centuries, Christianity's reach spread far and wide throughout the United Kingdom. In fact, if you were to visit, you'd find you're never too far from a beautiful old church building with an inspiring history.
Here in Edinburgh, we joke that churches are kind of like Starbucks, where there's one on every corner and sometimes one in the middle. But often in the city center, you walk around these churches and they've closed. And so kind of the joke is, well, that church is a community center. That church is a skate park. That church is a climbing gym. Well, that church is a bar. And sometimes that's meant some people are being very creative about using churches for cafe spaces or art spaces and still having vibrant worshiping communities in the midst of that. But others are sadly just closing. In the year 1910, Scotland hosted the World Evangelism Conference, whose tagline was to see the evangelization of the whole world in our lifetime. And so Scotland has in many ways been a leader in evangelism in the global church, with Christianity and planting churches and sending out missionaries. But unfortunately, in the last 100 years or so, you've seen just a steady decline in people who identify as Christian, or maybe who still identify as Christian culturally, but don't reflect it in terms of their lifestyle choices. The estimates now are about 2% of people in the nation of Scotland are regular church attendees. So 2% of the population of any country actually makes that technically an unreached people group.
In especially affected areas, sectarian and societal divides are the result of religion and politics being both interlocked and set at odds.
Why Glasgow? So there's two sides to the city. So on the one hand, it has an incredibly vibrant cultural scene, whether that's music, whether it's the arts, whether it's science. It's, in a lot of ways, a really vibrant, banging place with unbelievable, warm, like if you go on a bus, please expect people to speak to you, because they'll talk to you, they'll be interested in you, they'll want to know about you, they'll want to help you. But it also has some of the largest social problems anywhere in the UK. So in the area I live in, there are literally abandoned streets. One bent lamppost with one bulb and the whole street. But most of it's desolate anywhere, and no one lives there. Just down the hill, there's a set of stairs that literally will take you nowhere. People start them, they go up, and it literally just takes you to a stop. So there are whole landscapes of like deprivation and neglect, and that's not unusual.
In Scotland, concentrations of poverty in places like Maryhill show a significant life expectancy gap between most and least deprived areas. About 10.5 years for females and 13.2 years for males. This is due to inequalities found across income, employment, education, health, access, crime, and housing.
We're obviously known for crime as well, and things like sectarian problems. Yeah, I would say so. So there's a lot of that as well, and I mean a lot of that. But there's also a fantastic community spirit where people will band together and they will be a living, breathing presence for something else. You have a lot of both all in the one city. And I remember a comedian saying it's the city where you're most likely to get stabbed, but they're obviously the most likely to get you in an ambulance or put you in a cab as well. So I love Glasgow.
Question for you. Hearing the state of the church in Scotland, how does that make you feel? Take a second, turn to your neighbor, and just a word or two, share what stood out from that video. What it seems is that in Scotland, the map is no longer working. The terrain no longer lines up. Folks who are seeking God aren't finding God in the places they used to. In Luke 24, we meet two disciples walking on the road, and their map is just like that. The road for their map has stopped working. They thought they understood the story, they thought they knew where it was going, but their Lord died. Jesus was dead. They are walking away from Jerusalem, trying to make sense of what's left. These two disciples, Cleopas and his unnamed friend, they know that women and Peter had discovered the tomb empty, but unlike the women, they haven't put all the information together yet. They haven't yet understood that the empty tomb meant good news. The scripture reads, there we go. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking to each other about all these things that had happened. Now, since the theme of the day is maps, I feel like I'd be remiss to not share what that distance looks like. So if we were to start here at Emmanuel Presbyterian and walk just 7 miles north, you'd end up at the Cornish Pasty Company near Beardsley and 32nd Street. If we were to go south, you'd find yourself at the Henry near Camelback and 44th Street for a nice brunch, perhaps. If you go east, you'd reach Portillo's at the 101 and Shea. And west, welcome to Scramble at the base of North Mountain. Can you tell I was hungry when I was preparing this sermon? Hopefully you guys can stay later, and at brunch we can satisfy these cravings together, okay? So please stick around. But in all seriousness, 7 miles is a long haul. That's a fair amount of distance for a couple of dudes in sandals. Let's go back to the scripture. All right, while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, and their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So we've got Cleopas and this unnamed guy mulling over the events of the past days and grieving Jesus' absence when a stranger joins them. It's Jesus, but they don't yet recognize him. Jesus, in incognito mode, probes their knowledge and their emotions. They reveal to him that they're sad because they doubt the report of the women. And they even have male witnesses verify it. Typical. More tellingly, they are disillusioned. The prophet who they've been following and in whom they place their hope to deliver them from Rome's occupation has been crucified. The scripture continues. He said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad, and then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a mighty prophet in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since all these things took place." Their dreams had been destroyed. The map that had been laid out ahead of them was crumpled at their feet. And the scripture continues. "Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and they did not find his body where they came back, and they told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who had said that he was alive. Some of us who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Jesus, ever the teacher, works with them right where they are. He said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe that what all the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary to the Messiah that it would suffer all these things and then enter into glory?" Then, beginning with Moses, all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in the scriptures. That's right. Jesus prods them a little bit. They haven't followed his earlier teachings or observed his earlier actions carefully enough. He begins at the beginning, explaining to them once again that redemption of Israel does not come through glory or military might, but through the lowly path of suffering. One thing the Emmaus disciples still have going for them is their instinct for hospitality. As they approach their destination, Jesus seems to have put the ball in their court before heading off beyond Emmaus. But Cleopas and his friend insist that it's late and that he should stay with them. The story continues. As they came near the village where they were going, he walked ahead as if he was going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went to stay with them. And as they were sitting down at the table, Jesus blurs the lines between guest and host, as he so often did in the past. Classic Jesus. When he was at the table, he sat with them. He took the bread, he blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened when they recognized him, but then he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were our hearts not burning within us as he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and offered it to them. These words and actions were suddenly so familiar that the scales fell from their eyes, and they recognized their master. At which point, Jesus vanished. But that didn't really matter anymore, because finally they put it all together. The teaching, the events of the past days, and the connection between redemption and the hard way of the cross. It's still late, but they aren't tired anymore. The scripture continues. At that same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying that the Lord has risen indeed, and he's appeared to Simon. And then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread. That's right. They get up and return all those 7 miles to Jerusalem and become, like the women before them, witnesses to the good news. So me, as an international faith worker, in many ways, that road feels familiar. For example, in Scotland today, only about 39% of people identify as Christian, and more than half of them claim no religion at all. As you saw in the video, it said 2% of regular church attenders. Now, I want to break down that percentage for you because they define regular church attendance as attending 3 times a year, not 3 times a month. So anecdotally, we wonder if that's Christmas, Easter, and Mother's Day. Yeah, probably, huh? But what was assumed is no longer. Sadly, Scotland can now be considered an unreached people place again. Not because faith was never there. As you said, it's a Presbyterian tradition, right? But because it's no longer understood in the same way. That kind of shift can feel disorienting. Like holding a map that used to work, but no longer fits in the terrain. And still, Jesus comes near. What's remarkable in the Emmaus story is not the disciples' confusion, it's Jesus' response. He doesn't stand at the destination and call them back. He meets them on the road. He walks at their pace. He listens. He asks questions. He becomes, in a way, like a bridge. In Glasgow, communities are learning to live this way, not trying to recreate what once was, but asking, where are the gaps? Who are not being reached? And where is the connection missing? Because in a world where the church has come and gone, faith is less about drawing people into a place and more about going out to where the people are. I'd like to introduce you now to a spunky little faith community called Mosaic.
In polarized spaces where many churches double down on old formulas for doing church, there is a countercurrent of communities being drawn towards the compelling alternative found in the hope-filled, Jesus-centered faith offered by the Anabaptist Mennonite tradition. This tradition was once a fringe movement persecuted by Catholics and Protestants alike. Now, it has become an avenue of reconciling people with their longing for Jesus and Christian community, despite distrust of organized religion. Mosaic Church, who have found their way into the Anabaptist Mennonite story, embody this type of presence in Glasgow.
Who are the people that come? Maybe the rejects. They're the kind of folks who they've either rejected church or church has definitely rejected them for some reason or another, who've looked for a life raft or somewhere where they can do things like they're actually allowed to think, you're actually allowed to question and doubt, you're actually allowed to explore your faith, you're not going to be put in a box or put to a side or given a label.
I would say we've got probably quite a few people that are neurodiverse and therefore maybe don't always fit into spaces like where you have to act in a certain way. I think we're quite welcoming to that and we can make allowances for that. Like if somebody is quite noisy, that's maybe less disturbing with us than it is somewhere else. So we've got those kind of people, and then I would say there are lots of people who just got really hurt in church before. And some people say that Mosaic is their last chance at church. Like if that doesn't work out, they wouldn't go anywhere else.
Well, I didn't plan to be at Mosaic. I had renounced faith at that point and was on the way out. But I had a friend speaking at Mosaic for the first time after the death of his boy about what faith might mean to him now. I went into the whole meeting. It was a disaster from top to bottom. We were locked out of the building. The couple who were in charge at that time were having a fight in the street. And I loved all that because it meant no one was paying any attention to me. I did end up going to their home with one of them and a decided huff and one of them victorious. And yeah, they worshipped, and something in my heart broke, and I've not left yet. That was 20 something years ago. So.
Well, I guess we are valuable, but I just, on the ground, it feels very messy and very often very frustrating. So yeah, think of us as something very real and grounded, not some sort of amazing vision that is perfect. We're in no way that.
I have another question for you. Why do you think Mosaic is able to build bridges to places that others have been unable to? Take another second to turn to your neighbor and in a word or two, share what stood out. So when faith is no longer assumed, it becomes something else. Not inherited automatically, but chosen. Not cultural, but practiced. Not passive, but shared. A little more like learning to use a map again, paying attention, walking intentionally, sometimes even getting lost, and finding God there. So back on the Emmaus road, after all the walking, something happened. When they arrived at the table, not in explanations, not in certainty, but in the breaking of bread, their eyes are opened. Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and suddenly they recognized him. If the map no longer orients us, the table does. Here we remember who Christ really is. Here we remember who we are. We are recentered, not by certainty, but by presence. The table doesn't require perfect understanding, it invites participation. Mosaic in Glasgow is a community that makes room, not because it's solved everything, but because it knows how to welcome. And that's what the table is. Not a reward for having the right map, but nourishment for people still on the road. And we're thrilled to partner with them on this journey. And I know, Emmanuel Presbyterian, I know God will use you in a similar way, right where you are. Will you close with me in prayer? God of the journey,